Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Hey gang, welcome to another episode of Weird Web Radio. My name is Lonnie Scott, and I am your host. Thank you very much for being here. Before we go too far, I want to wish all of you well and hope that you're all being safe and sound, and that this whole COVID-19 coronavirus thing, the Twilight Zone kind of world we're kind of living in right now, I'm just wishing you blessings of health, love, and laughter, and I really hope that, again, that you're all safe. So please take care of yourself and each other. Now, in this episode, we're talking to Mortellus. Mortellus is the High Priestess of the Coven of Leaves in Rutherfordton, and I know I said that wrong, in North Carolina. It's a Gardnerian Coven operating an outer court training group who like to say that they are a bubbling cauldron of bitter esoterica slithering their way through western North Carolina. And I kind of love them for that. Additionally, she is a Mortician, author, medium, and a Necromancer. Her book of pagan death rites and rituals that is going to be published by Llewellyn is scheduled to come out winter of this year. That would be 2020. If you're listening to this after the fact, just run out and get it. She's got a second unannounced project in the works. Nice little teaser in her bio. Currently, she resides on 3 acres that are hastily becoming overgrown again with her husband, daughter, 2-year-old boy-girl twins, 2 chickens, and 1 really, really ridiculous dog. She's set to release a book on pagan death rites, as before mentioned, and rituals coming out the winter of this year. That would be 2020. And again, that will be Llewellyn who is publishing it. The title of the book is Do I Have to Wear Black? I cannot begin to describe how wonderful Mortellus is as a human being, a witch, and her general overall love and adoration of witchcraft and the occult and her various practices. I'm happy to say that Mortellus and I have become what I believe very good friends since this show was even recorded. Just a good person, a good soul, a good kindred spirit, and I'm really happy that her work was brought to my attention so I could have her on the show. You're going to find, I hope, as just as I did, her voice is very soothing. It's no wonder that she's so beloved, probably, in her profession. The show is very, very focused on what you and I and the occult and paranormal, the pagan, wider world are likely to face when it's time to deal with our own funeral and the funerals of those that we love that are in our similar spiritual traditions. And what Mortellus has done is shown us how to get over those walls to get through to the industry what we really need and seek in order to say goodbye to our beloved dead. I really don't want to stand in the way much more. If you haven't already, go to weirdwebradio.com and click store or shop and go check out all the t-shirts and the hoodies and the hats and the things that are available. I'm always adding new designs and things that are out there that you can rock the brand and help spread the word of the show. And of course, you'll want to come join the membership on patreon.com/weirdwebradio so you can get access to all the really cool extended interviews. Other than that, again, stay safe out there. Stay weird. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the show. Okay, we are recording. Mortellus, welcome to Weird Web Radio. It's great to have you here.
Hello, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, what other perfect time for it, right? It's nearly a full moon. If it's not full, I'm not sure. Looks close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, and it's late at night, so we're kind of like coast to coast AM. Just start that little funky beat they do, that boom 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 boom. All right, so I think I think a lot of people, at least my listeners, may not be familiar with who you are and the things that you do. You were put in contact with me, thankfully, by Amy Blackthorne. And I thought it was really cool that she thought we should connect. And as soon as I got to know you a little bit and found out the things you're working on, I immediately knew you are, well, one, you're awesome, and two, you need to be on the show.
Well, I'm glad we made friends. Amy is one of my favorite people in the world, so she has good taste. If she likes you, you got to be okay.
Hey, I'll take that. And right back at you. So I guess there's a lot of places I'd like to start, and I've been giving this some thought because I want everyone to get a chance to get to know you, and why I thought you were important to bring to the show as well. So let's get into the fact that you have a book deal that's already inked. The ink is dry. It's a done deal. It's a wrap. And you call it, "Do I Have to Wear Black?"
Yes.
Yeah. So what's this book going to be about?
Comes out winter 2020 if we all survive to see it in print. This book is a collection of death rites and rituals for pagan and pagan adjacent groups. I felt like in my time in mortuary school and in my process in death work and just sort of becoming who I am today, we're all constantly in flux. I feel life isn't interesting if you're not always changing, but I felt that the industry as a whole just really didn't have an appreciation of minority faith groups, othered faith groups, and there's so much bias in the industry that I felt like I wanted to create something that would not only approach the problem from the side of the funeral industry, give them something to pick up and look at and say, okay, these are the needs of these groups, but something that would give those groups resources and the dialogue that they needed to communicate with those funeral professionals. Language, I think, is a huge barrier, and just knowing what you can ask for, knowing what to say, and knowing who your allies are is just a huge amount of power. And I wanted to give that to people.
Yeah. Now, when we spoke before, you brought up one of the ways that they prepare you in the death industry. I'm not sure how to refer to it, the funeral industry. That that you were given something like a really thin pamphlet or book almost to say these are the sorts of funerals you should be prepared for.
Right. I mean, have you been to college?
Yeah. Yep.
Feel
sure
free to
have.
cut that question out if you don't.
Yeah. Marketing degree, not funeral
Fun.
industry.
I am getting my third and fourth degrees consecutively right now. I started out in marketing, graphics, and advertising, and found my way to death. But you know how it is. You have a multitude of core classes, and one of them, funeral services, was meant to prepare us for the type of funerals that we might encounter in the world. Through our career as funeral directors and morticians, this book was meant to say, here's what you'll see, here's what people ask for, here's the kind of funerals you need to know how to perform. This book isn't as thick as a Cosmo magazine and is about as intelligently written. My apologies to Cosmo, but I'm sure you can imagine the kind of things I found in it. It was very Abrahamic, Catholic funerals, Jewish funerals, Baptist funerals, Episcopalian funerals, that kind of thing. Fraternal orders. And I love this book because it gave me a parameter. I love anything that gives me a parameter. There's a section on Buddhists, and it notes something to the effect of there was a time that we would not have had to have included Buddhists, but as there are about 30,000, 100, whatever number of practicing Buddhists in the United States at this time, we had to include them. They are a significant portion of our population. Well, I thought about that for a bit because that book has no pagan funerals, no secular humanist funerals, nothing for someone different. And I did a little research and realized that as of 2018 Pew Research Center surveys, we know there are about something like 1.5 million self-identifying pagans in the United States alone. And you look at those numbers and you look at that disparity and you think, why, when we're such a huge portion of the population, are we so overlooked in terms of death and dying? We are as large. Oh, forgive me, I had an alarm that went off.
That's all right.
We're as large a population, I believe, as Catholics in the United States, but we just don't get that kind of acknowledgement in a death industry. And if anything, there's terrible bias. And I often encountered situations where there was just this sort of bigotry and stereotyping and aggression toward pagan communities that I couldn't bear it anymore, and I wanted to make there be something better.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're out there doing that. I know we talked about this before we were recording, but I had a friend of mine, in fact, the very man who introduced me to heathenry and runes and some of the things that became so vitally important to my own spiritual life and path today, all these many years later. When he died very suddenly and unexpected at the age, I think he was 32 or 33. And his father took over all the funeral, proceedings. And, here's a great and proud heathen man who's died, never been a Christian or anything a day in his life, and given a Christian burial. And not only a Christian burial, but somehow managed to hide a lot of the details from most of us. It took a long time for us to find where he was buried. In fact, when I did find out, I went and consecrated his grave as, sacred, holy, heathen ground. And when I reflect back on that and the discussion comes up with friends who are in the pagan and the occult community, one thing always comes up as a source of fear for many of us is, how do we avoid ending up with a Christian funeral?
And that's, first, let me say I'm so sorry that happened to your friend. But I've come to notice that over the years that when a person says a Christian burial, they use Christian to mean dignified, as though anything other than that would be a cruelty to the dead, as though giving them what they wanted in life is an unkindness and is taking away their last opportunity to meet the one true God, TM. No, I think that's why it's so important that we designate who we want to be the executor of our will, of our estate, who our power of attorney is, fill out those advance directives, write down what you want that funeral to be, because in death, your next of kin, regardless of who that person is, your parent, your sibling, your aunt, your uncle, they get to decide unless you have decided for them. And funeral homes, even, there are so many wonderful ones out there, and there are definitely a ton of amazing morticians and funeral directors, and I don't want to discredit them, but there are some that truly believe that they're doing the right thing by guiding you toward what they believe is right. I'd like to refer you to this quote from a textbook titled Sociology for Funeral Service. It states that the religion of the United States is basically Judeo-Christian. The overall purpose of religion in a funeral service is to allow for the acknowledgement of the doctrine of atonement. The doctrine of atonement states that the created is united with its creator at death, and it reflects the belief that a person who has lived according to the standards of his or her faith will receive an eternal reward readied by God in heaven. The fact that we're taught that that is the purpose of a funeral says a lot about the nature and character of funeral services in the United States.
Yeah, that does. That's quite a window into that world.
And I won't even talk about how that same textbook goes on to define a family as a man and a woman with children, but, quote, families, in quotes, sometimes consist of a different arrangement.
Hmm.
It's a very conservative world. I think it's really interesting. Even my embalming textbook, I recall reading it said that in the United States, Judeo-Christian traditions fostered respect for the human dead, and that's quite a statement.
That is quite a statement. Now, I'm no expert on exactly how it's approached, but having attended many a funeral, unfortunately, in my lifetime, I can say how they've been run through that lens. And one thing I find very consistent is that it is far from respectful from the deceased. It is almost universally selling their religion to the audience.
I would agree with that. And I will say, to an extent, that doesn't really have anything to do with your funeral service professional, and more to do with, the place where the family chose to hold it, or the officiant that they chose. That's certainly a massive factor there, but it's a part of it. And how are we supposed to change that if nobody stands up and fights back? Even the title of this book, it was something that a classmate had said to me at one point. I was talking about, I don't even remember what the topic was at the time, but we were having a discussion about types of funerals, and I was always that person going, well, what about a Wiccan funeral, or whatever? And this person just very, very vocally expressed their disgust at the idea, and how they were creeped out by the way people behaved and acted, and what people wore. And it's like, what do I even do if I'm at a Wiccan funeral? Do I have to wear black? And that struck me so funny because everybody wears black to funerals. It's a common mourning color, but
Yeah.
if it's a pagan person doing it, suddenly it's satanic and creepy. It's like I was so sort of caught off guard by that question.
That explains the title of the book. Now, when you decide to write the book, I can see through a lens of your own practice, and of course being in the industry as a mortician, why you would be motivated to do so. But when you begin writing a book like this, targeting a larger pagan audience, how do you begin? What's your research like?
I have to say, I did not set out with the intention of writing a book. I found myself in a circumstance where I was face to face with a Llewellyn editor, and just sort of foisted myself upon them in a rant about how this needed to exist in the world, and sort of the answer was, well, we'll write it then. Just, well, make it. Why don't you?
Yeah.
But I think, fortunately for me, I had this pile of research that I was sitting on, but at the end of the day, what really made this book sing was I had so many amazing people and so many different traditions help me. I wanted to approach this like a guide to a variety of books, and of course I couldn't include everyone, and I couldn't be completely comprehensive, but we have chapters dedicated to groups such as, British traditional witchcraft and heathenry and Druidism and Thelema and so on and so forth. Then I had so many awesome people who pitched in. John Beckett was a voice of advice along the way in the Druidic chapter. Leah Svensson with the heathen chapter. Just amazing people doing tons of work. But
yeah, John's been on the show twice, so I could say I've gotten to know John a little bit.
John's a great person, and we like to joke that he's the Dan Rather of paganism. He's just very level-headed and cool about everything.
Yeah, that's fairly accurate, actually, now that you mention it.
Credit to Cordis.
Yeah. So, when you were writing the book and researching the book, what's something that really surprised you? Something maybe you didn't expect to discover that was, pleasant or not, doesn't matter either way, but something that really sort of surprised you?
I think that I had two kind of different revelations that stick out to me with your question. One was in researching Wiccan practices and what those rituals might look like. I was surprised at the divide amongst groups and how they viewed each other. Having to sort of sort out that separation between what's British traditional Wicca, what's eclectic Wicca, what is traditional witchcraft, which is different somehow, and then we have all these sort of boxes that people draw around each other, and I found that to be a big surprise, and especially when you're dealing with sort of modern traditions where you're either creating something new within the construct of a region of the world and a time and a flavor, or if you're dealing with a Reconstructionist group like Hellenism, it's just sort of interesting how people sort of segregate themselves from each other. We we like to think we're one big cohesive community, but I think in a lot of ways we're sort of eating each other, which breaks my heart a bit.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up John, of course, and he is our Dan Rather in a lot of ways, I guess. John Beckett was recently on Devin Hunter's podcast, and I heard John say something to the effect of he used to think we were all going to end up in this big tent paganism, and now he sees it's shaping up more like if like facilities and temples and things like that are going to start to exist that cater to people like us, that they're going to exist in much more specific traditions than they are this wider pagan approach. And it's interesting that you see that shake out too while you're researching funeral practices.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And one thing that I saw in sort of not just in researching, but in editing and sort of coming back around and looking at it again, I realized that there's a lot of hurt feelings between groups where people don't want to be called something because they feel it has a certain connotation, or they want to be included with a group that they don't necessarily belong in, or they want to be lumped together for cohesion when really that's not an honest approach. And it's hard, it's tough, it's really tough.
Yeah, it is. So aside from those surprises and things, I guess when the book becomes available for sale and people end up with it in their hands, ultimately, what is it you're hoping to achieve with that book?
So nobody could write this book and everyone love it. I fully expect about, everybody who buys a copy to go, this is trash, and like throw it in the garbage can.
I doubt that's going to happen.
What I hope that it does, I sincerely hope with all my heart that if nothing else, people look at that and go, this inspires me to write something new of my own. And I want to look at the traditions of my group, and I want to make new rituals, and it inspires me to go write that will or plan that funeral, or it's encouraged me to talk to my funeral professional in a different way. It's not about the book, it's not about me, and it's not about whether or not people enjoyed it or it becomes a bestseller. It's about starting a conversation, and that's what matters to me more than anything.
Yeah. So as a mortician, have you personally had a lot of pagan clients coming to you?
Well, that's complex. I'm just finishing up mortuary school. I've worked along the way through lab programs at my college, but I've been doing death work for years, mostly as a home burial guide and a green burial guide. But that's sort of outside of being a mortician, right? That's more to do with being clergy. In terms of home burials, green burials, yes, I've worked with a lot of pagan families. In the context of working within the industry, no, but I'm also not in a place where they can really find me right now. I'm only just reaching that part of my life, only to have it terribly disrupted by a pandemic. So
All right.
it's very
So,
exciting.
uh,
We're
you, you bring up a green burial and home burials. I
mhm.
don't think I don't think some people would understand the distinction between those or what those even are. Could you explain that?
Sure. I really hate those terms. I'll start there because
Fair.
green burial and home burial are just fancy, divisive words for what every single funeral would have looked like up until about the 1950s. Um, it just means not a very fancy funeral, and it's officiated by your family, and you bury your loved one on your property or your friend's property, wherever you're allowed, and you use a box you built yourself and you wrap them in a shroud made out of their bed sheet and you wash them yourself and you have a wake in your living room and it's all very, very personal. But today we use home burial to delineate, strange hippie weirdos who don't want to do industry things, and green burials are a different type of hippie weirdo that is very
Hmm.
eco-conscious and buys an expensive plot. So I don't like those terms, but at the end of the day, green burial simply delineates something that's eco-conscious, and home burial delineates something that is primarily taken care of by the family.
Okay. Um, if you want to set something like that up, is it a matter of a funeral home wouldn't assist you doing that? Is I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
I wouldn't say that. Just as much as I'm a voice for the bad things happening to our communities, I also want to be a voice for the great things happening in the funeral community. We have this entire generation of young, predominantly female people coming into the industry who are really changing a lot of things. So don't be surprised to find that you have a funeral home in your area that will totally assist you with those things. Go ask, find out what they offer. A home burial assisted by a funeral director from your local funeral home could be just the smoothest sailing ship you ever sailed on. They do all the paperwork for you, help you arrange things, dress the body, clean the body, do the things the family might find difficult, arrange for transportation, that sort of thing. Green burials are commonly assisted by funeral homes. Typically, it just means that you're purchasing a different type of burial container, perhaps something woven or biodegradable. Um, you'd have a plot in a green burial space, green cemetery. You would likely not have embalming. If you did, it would be limited to specific types of processes. Um, so yes, you could absolutely find a funeral home to assist you with those.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's going to end up be very helpful for people who have had that sort of thing on their mind to know that they can reach out to a local funeral homes and perhaps find the assistance that they need. Before I booked you to be on the show, I asked fans of the show if they had any questions. And I'd like to get into some of those if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So, one thing that was asked was I'm trying to come up with a non clucky way to word this and failing. Yeah, I know how that feels sometimes. How hard is it to find a burial site where you can do alternative burials, such as I guess we were just discussing? It says no formaldehyde or biodegradable caskets, and then she says, or even that mushroom suit thing, and I have no idea what that is.
Okay, well, that's like a three-parter, so I'll take it in parts.
Right.
Let's talk about the mushroom suit first. It's kind of a hip new thing right now. It's basically a jumpsuit. Like think of your mechanic's jumpsuit, but with like a hood, and it's loaded with mushroom spores that supposedly will grow as your body decomposes using the decomposing material to feed off of. Unfortunately, they have a huge failure rate. They're very, very expensive, and it has been the experience of many funeral professionals that when ordering them, The orders are frequently not filled, or definitely not filled in a timely fashion. So just do your research if that's something
Mhm.
you're interested in.
Okay.
Um, as for finding green burial plots,
Yeah.
that can be as simple as your backyard.
No way.
So, home burials on your property are legal in most of the United States. Most. The exceptions tend to be zoned areas, so check with your local housing authority or call your local register of deeds and find out if home property burials are allowed for your address. But as long as you own the property or have permission to do a burial there, it's all yours.
No kidding.
Yep. It's
I
pretty
would have
simple.
never in my life guessed that was even a possibility.
For example, in my hometown, we're not zoned against home burials. You just have to go to your local register of deeds office afterward and let them know where on the property the person is buried so they can mark it on your deed.
Hmm. Well, let's say 20 years after you've had home burials in your own backyard.
Hmm.
Uh, for some reason, everyone's dead, or some reason you no longer own the property, or the government's come along and claimed your string of the blocks that you live on because you're
Hmm.
going to put in a strip mall or a casino or something, right?
Hmm.
Um, what happens in that case to the burials that are already there?
That's a good question. First of all, that new property owner would know that the burial plot is there because it's marked on the deed. Um, if it's only been 20 years, like you said, most new owners of a property, if it's just a family buying a house that has a burial plot on it, they just stay there. It's just many a person has bought a plot of farmland to discover they also inherited a small cemetery. They
Ah,
just
okay.
they just remain.
So that's where all
Um,
those come from.
yeah. If it's an industrial sort of situation where they're doing major real estate development, they would disinter you and move you somewhere else at their own cost, and then the records would be reflected to note that. But if it's been, say, 100 years, that's very different. Bones that are completely decomposed to nothing but skeleton are no longer considered a human body, and bones that are more than 100 years old are they can legally be just owned as property. So sometimes they're reinterred, sometimes they just get bulldozed up.
Oh, no kidding. Huh.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how identifiable they are, if anyone notices it or cares. Generally speaking, most of the time they'll move them and reinter them, or
Yeah.
send them to the local funeral home to be uh, ground into cremains. Cremains are they're not actually ash; they're just ground bone. Grind them
Okay.
up, grind them up, and have them scattered somewhere.
Okay. Cool. Um, I guess that explains the little mystery I've explored. I found the town that I live in, Mattoon, Illinois. No secret. um, I found one of the original, like, 1898 street fair book. It was a big street fair. It was a big deal for the history of this town, and actually for the history of Illinois. It was the first big street fair, I think, in the whole state. Um, Not too bad for a little town in the middle of it. Um, but it makes this mention of the original burial ground of the town being moved to one of the new big city cemeteries that still exists today. And I became obsessed with trying to track down where that original cemetery was, because the way the wording was suggesting that they may not have gotten everyone.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I've cornered it, I think, down to two different blocks in town, in the oldest part of town. And if I were a betting man, and I'm not, I would say that there's a bank parking lot at minimum on top of that original burial ground.
Well,
And I've often wondered, what they found during that construction.
well, if you'd like, I'm pretty good at finding those kinds of things. If you'll send me what you have, I'll locate it for you.
I most certainly will. You are awesome. That
Yeah,
doesn't mean you all get to harass her. She's going to charge you a fee.
that will work for tea and cake. That's
Oh, cheap.
I'm nothing if not cheap, Lonnie. That's
Yeah, put that on a shirt. Include my name,
absolutely.
right? All right, let's get to another question. And that question, by the way, was from Mona. I'll leave last names out of this in case people don't want to reveal their identities to all the fan base. Thank you, Mona, for submitting that question. Next question comes from my buddy Basil. He says, "Oh boy, interesting topic." Yep. He says, "I would like to ask her to contrast the philosophies of societies." Hey, no big deal, right? Such as the Egyptians that believed that preserving the body was the best way to have a great afterlife, as opposed to societies that destroyed or cremated the bodies of their loved ones. And how did we develop such opposite viewpoints and rituals? That's a big question.
It is a big question, and I do think it has the sort of foundational basis that it's preservation versus destruction, and I don't think that's really the question. I think it's symbolic preservation versus transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Cremation isn't destroying a body, it's transforming it into something new. You know, I've stood next to a crematory retort as someone has been cremated, and watched their body dance on the flames and watched the smoke curl up, and stood there in the smoke of that body being transformed into ash and air and fire. And there's something so very magical about being changed from one form to another in such a visceral way, and I can understand why ancient man would have chosen it. But then you take the ancient Cometics and look at their very sort of beautiful ideas about preserving the body like its own kind of idol, because you could go on to become a part of God. You went to Aru, which is the field of reeds, but it's also the soul of the Nile River, and you became a part of Osiris, of his blood and bones when you died, and you became preserved as something that could be viewed and touched and visited because you lent your energy to something so big. And they're both beautiful ideas.
Yeah. I know from my own experience and research, I think I know I've read where mummification during periods in Egyptian history was thought of, like you said, something that was preserved that could be sort of an idol, but also some vehicle that they could return to here on Earth. And I know cremation was a form of dealing with the dead in Northern Europe at one point, in different periods and different regions. I please don't quote me on a source on this, because I can't provide one where I learned this or how valid it is, but I know it's an idea that exists in modern minds, especially in certain sectors of heathenry. I've had these conversations that people think if you're not cremated, then you're somehow still attached to your body, that's what releases you from the body. Different ideas, different places.
That is very true, but I don't think they're all that different. Whereas one is about remaining a touchstone and one is about being utterly transformed.
Mm-hmm.
They're two sides of the same coin, I think.
Yeah, I'll take that. Let's see. A friend of mine has said this so many times, and I thought I'll let you in on one of the existing anxieties about death in a pagan mind. I hope I won't name her, but I just hope she doesn't mind if she listens to this. I have a friend who insists, first of all, that she does not want anything at all done with her body for 3 days. Not cremated, not embalmed, not anything. I guess you could put her body in a cooler or something to keep the the processes from going forward too quickly. Because her belief is that for 3 days, you could absolutely feel anything done to you inside your body. And she's not alone. There are people out there who really feel that way. So if someone comes to you and says, for my arrangements, I don't want anything done to me for 3 days, can you accommodate people for that?
Absolutely. 100%. And
No kidding.
in fact, your funeral home would be probably very happy to charge you a storage fee for 3 days. I'm being terrible. I don't mean it like that at all.
You're saying they don't do that for teas and cake.
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound completely like a jackass here. I mean, you think about it. There's the liability, the overhead, and they have to keep security on your body. So there's cost for them involved.
Right.
That's a very big refrigerator to keep running. But
I'm sure it is.
that's a belief held by a few cultures. Comedics, of course, they believe that the first cuts made to the body in the process of preservation are felt by the person, and that they're a cruelty. So the Sem priests, the priests tasked with performing the preservation and mummification, they would not make that cut. Essentially, they'd hire someone off the street to come in and make the cut, and the priests and the family of the deceased person would yell mean things at them while they did it. Like, oh, how could you do that? That's the worst thing you could ever do. And then when they were done, they would throw rocks at them. And I don't know where you sign up for that job, but it sounds pretty terrible. But
right.
It's also a very Appalachian folk belief. And in fact, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but in images of old Southern, like Depression era wakes, you often see a bowl sitting on the chest of the deceased. That bowl would contain salt poured there by the eldest female member of the family. And the salt was meant to hold their spirit in the body so they wouldn't wander over those 3 days.
No kidding.
But to fully answer your friend's concern, yeah, that's definitely something you could put in your funeral plan and say, hey, as part of my arrangements, I want to be stored for 3 days before you do anything. And just, that's an easy request to fill.
No kidding. Huh. I wonder if like you tied it back to some folk beliefs that aren't really that old, or I guess I should say that are more recent in time, that you could find people that believe it. I don't know if she's aware of those. I'm gonna have to track her down and ask her if she got that idea from exposure to people who had those beliefs, or if it's just something that's been passed down through her family.
It's something you see in Appalachia, and obviously the Appalachian folk would have taken it from the Irish, the Scots, European settlers. So it's something you would see in Europe a bit. But yeah, it's not that uncommon.
I've got one more fan question for you. This one comes from Catherine Heath. I'll give you her whole name because Kat is an author and she's awesome, and she's got a book coming out soon.
Well, hello, Kat. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. She says, and she got in right under the wire, just as I was setting up. What alternate funeral or mourning rituals can you think of that could be helpful to those who have lost family and friends during this current pandemic?
That is a tough one. Dealing with the fact that many people are dying in hospitals and family can't be there with them, and they're saying their goodbyes over FaceTime, and then the funeral home can't have more than 10 people, including staff, and you have to be so careful. And it's really a tragedy the way this is happening right now, but it can't be helped. It's for the public safety. I think there's two approaches to this question. First, the practical approach. Obviously, you can always postpone a memorial ritual for your loved one. When things clear up, you can always go back and have that service. In the interim, I would like to suggest that people try holding services of their own in their own home and space, using a puppet to stand in for their loved one. just enact the type of service that you would like to have for them with your household members so that you're not risking exposure. If you're not handy at sewing, you could use anything, a photograph, a doll, some tokens of this loved one, and hold those services there for them. They can be very meaningful. As a secondary option and approach, having that loved one, the next of kin, reach out to the funeral home and just express to them some things they would like the funeral home to do behind the scenes, I think is really, really powerful. And never forget that that's something that you can do. Your mortician embalmer is so happy to be there for you. And so many of us are struggling right now with trying to do our best by these individuals who are meeting their burial place alone, and we recognize that. So, if you want us to wash them with salted water, if you wanted to leave some consecrated salt or water for us to bathe them with, that's something we could do, or leave oils for us to dress their body with. If there's a certain kind of music that was important to that person, or music that's spiritually significant, I promise you, most embalmers are behind the scenes playing the radio in the prep room. I almost always play Wardruna because I find it very powerful and magical, and I love listening to it while I work. But if there was something like that you wanted to provide or tell us about, just any little thing, we're happy to do whatever we can to make it meaningful and transformational for that family.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that you're listening to Wardruna while you work. I dig it.
Wardruna, Hylung.
Yeah, I listen to Wardruna while I craft runes.
I always joke. I love my favorite professor, Shauna Rotobaugh. She has the best iPod ever, because you go into labs and you don't know if you're going to be listening to like the golden oldies or like the best hits of the 90s, but it's great in there.
I guess I did have one more question. We sort of touched on it a little bit, talking about alternative burial options and things like that, and home burials, the term that you hate so dearly. John Hyatt.
These are just burials. They're
Yeah. John Hyatt asked this one. He actually asked you directly when we were doing audio testing, when we tried to do this before. John is one of the members of the High Read of the Troth along with me, and he also has his own show out there, Gifts of the Weird. I've been a guest on his show. I highly recommend it. People go check that out. One thing he asked, and the way he asked it, was people used to take their own dead, and he wanted to know if you had recommendations on how to approach that.
I assume he means collecting them, taking them home, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess we didn't dig in exactly how he meant. I thought he meant having the burials at home and dealing with the dead yourself, but used to take their own dead. It's too bad we can't call John up and say, huh?
Well, I'll answer both things,
Yeah.
just in case. And you tell John that if he wants to ask me himself, I'm happy to come on and chat with him one day. But,
sounds good.
But you can transport your own dead. It's a little finicky depending on your area, but call up your local coroner or medical examiner and just tell them you want a burial transport permit. It'll probably cost you $5, and it'll be just a little something you can carry in your car in case you get pulled over. Why do you have a dead guy in the back? Well, here's why. But
Yeah.
never forget that, if you're the next of kin, let's say your spouse has died and you're in charge of what happens to them, their body is your property in a manner of speaking. You have all the rights in this situation. So if your loved one died in the hospital, you can say to that doctor, "We'll load them up in the car because I'm taking them out of here." You can do that.
No kidding.
They are your loved one, and you can take them. There are also some rules about if a person dies. If you're at home, most people would call 911 and say, "Oh, well, Uncle Jeff has just died." Or if you're expecting Uncle Jeff to die, you might call the funeral home. But you can say, well, I've reported this death, but I'm going to keep them here for the next 36 hours or however long. And, spend your time with your loved one. Wash them, dress them, lay next to your deceased spouse in bed and tell them all your goodbyes. Like, these are things you can do. And if you were choosing to have a home burial, you report that death. And if your area requires you to call a funeral home to get the funeral director to fill out the death certificate and such, some towns require that, and some you can do it yourself. But you just have to manage all your paperwork properly. And I definitely put an outline for that in my book if anyone is interested in those kinds of things. But there are also some wonderful books out there that have instructions on home burials, and there's the National Home Burial Alliance. You go to their website, you'll find some details and instructions for managing, taking care of your loved one at home.
Awesome. We have talked an awful lot about the funeral industry and things to do, things that people want to do and questions they had about that. But we haven't really talked a whole lot about you in the little bit of time we have remaining in the regular portion of the show. What even type of pagan, witch, occultist am Mortellus?
That's a fun question. I don't know. I'm a mixed bag. I am a 3rd degree Gardnerian High Priestess. I run a training coven in Rutherfordton, North Carolina called the Coven of Leaves. You can find us online. So I guess that's sort of my street-facing persona. Behind the scenes, I work with the Morgan, Anubis, Orisha Oya, and have a personal practice that is a lot of ceremonial magic, sort of blended with sympathetic, animistic magic, and I'm going to say a dirty word. I do a lot of necromancy. So, ooh, I know it's such an ugly word in the pagan community. You put that on your name tag, and no one looks at you in the streets.
Yeah. Well, look, folks, for anybody that's listening and the word necromancy scares you, have you ever gone to a grave of a loved one and left flowers or a coin or something and said words out loud to the spirit as though they could hear you?
You've
Congratulations. You're a necromancer.
You are. I always tell people that. Or do you have like a mantle over your fireplace with a picture of your dead grandma and a candle next to it? You are a necromancer.
Yeah. Hey, so ancestral veneration and necromancy is a blurry, crazy thing.
It is, exactly. But how could I, a magical practitioner who works with the dead, stand in a prep room with a deceased person's body and consecrate them and welcome them into the land of their dead, their new existence, and not say that I have done necromancy? That is what I am.
Yeah, and agreed. Since you say, how could you stand there and do that? I'm curious, what do you do as you stand there with the dead and help them? What is your sort of go-to method in that practice?
I'll give you a soapbox. I think that embalming has a PR problem. We look at it in a certain way, that it's something unnatural and ghoulish and bad for the environment and possibly terrible and unnecessary and cruel. But embalming as a word just means to preserve or to give something a good scent. If you have made a jar of pickles, you have embalmed something. If you sprayed air freshener in your bathroom after doing something terrible, you've embalmed it. Embalming can be green. It can be natural. It doesn't have to include chemicals. It doesn't have to be what you think that it is. Just giving that body more time and giving it rites and rituals behind the scenes that are different from putting it in a box. Just something as simple as aerating the organs and removing fluids from the body will give it more time because you've removed bacteria that was present, so it's not going to decay as quickly. Ordinarily, we would run arterial fluid through the body which is a preservative and gives the body more time, which is very useful if they require an autopsy, or they have to be flown to another state, or you can't get a loved one in town for a few days. So I think embalming can be a very meaningful ritual, and it's one of my favorite parts of the funerary process. I love working behind the scenes with the deceased and being part of their moments. But in terms of how I make it magical, I certainly am respectful of the beliefs and practices of every individual that's in front of me, but we don't always know those, actually. In the process of my training, we worked a lot with donors or indigents or the unclaimed, and they lay there before us with no family, and there will be no funeral other than what the school and the funeral service professionals give them, and they'll be scattered or buried in a donor plot. So I take that time with my music and carefully washing them with consecrated water, and I speak to them and comb their hair and give them love as though they're my own family. Through the process of what I'm doing, I'll make a mark across the forehead with a bit of salted water and lay my hands on either side of their face and say, "The mother of the starless sky has borne thee on this day, and you are become one who knoweth the unknown." And then I welcome them to be born into the land of the dead.
I like it. That's quite beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I guess, I've had friends who have been police officers and paramedics, EMTs, nurses, who have been intimately close to death in various ways. And in many cases, it's destroyed their ability to see anything beyond the flesh and live a very material mindseted life. Yet here you are, you work quite close to the dead. That is your industry, and you maintain a magical worldview and practice. So how do you keep that view when you're so close to death all the time?
I don't know. I think it's twofold. I think I see a lot with professionals like you mentioned, EMTs and so forth, and they don't get to be a part of that process after a point. They do their work and then that person is gone from their life. So it's very disconnected for them. But for people like myself who are, home burial guides or who work in funeral services, do that kind of work, we take in that loved one and we walk them to their grave. We're there with them the whole time, and we grieve right along with their family, to the point that there's a specialized term for funeral directors fatigue, or sometimes called compassion fatigue, where we are always grieving. And I think just being a deeper part of that process helps maintain that connection. But for me also, I experienced a near-death experience as a child that had a hugely meaningful impact on who I am now. And I've always joked that I have one foot in the grave, where I feel this connection with the spirit of who they were and who they will be. And I leave that part of me ungrounded so that I can stay with them.
What happened to you during your near-death experience? Are you willing to share?
I will share if you like. So it's a story I wind up telling more often than not these last few days. I spent such a huge part of my life never telling this story, and in the last couple of weeks, it's come tumbling out of me time and time again, which is so.
For the record, you started it.
I did start it. It was pertinent to the answer to the question. I had a bad experience. Had a difficult childhood. and at the ripe old age of 5, attempted suicide.
Oh my goodness.
I was told not to eat heart pills because they were not candy and they would kill you, and, well, I knew where they were, so I did. But, in reality, I ate them and passed out and was taken to the emergency room and laid in a coma for 4 days. In my mind, in my body, in my spirit, I traveled to what I believe was the underworld and met a deity who tasked me with something, and seeing that place and being there and feeling the reality of it and the weight of where I was, and waking up and not being afraid anymore and having this different grasp on the world despite having no knowledge of anything pagan or I would have never known what a different deity was other than the Christian God as a child, and just taking that away with me and knowing there was something more and something greater, and that I couldn't be dead because I had things to do. It gave me such a purpose.
Who was the deity, if you don't mind my asking?
I believe that it was the Morrigan. She did not tell me her name, but I don't know. After I left that place, anytime I saw a crow, I knew it was her, and I'd find a black feather in my path, and I knew it was her, or I don't know, just so many little things. And then as an adult, I found her in a book, and I knew that it was her. So I've always felt like I owed her a death. My life is on borrowed time.
Hey, I think we all are.
Yep, for sure.
To some
Definitely.
degree or another. Yep. I mean, my goodness, I think I survived a terrible flu when I was a kid. I've had my gallbladder removed. I think of the things that I've dealt with alone, that if not for modern medicine in some way, I may not be here. So yeah, I'm on borrowed time.
I have this opportunity right now to go be with a disaster mortuary operational response team. We should get our marching orders in a couple days, and you have these moments where it's like I can go do this, and I might die out there, but I can help people, and I can make a difference, and I can do the work of these deities who've given me gifts that I can never repay. And then you look at your little children and you think, what might I be leaving behind? And it's so weighty, but
yeah. Nope, I completely understand that one. I guess another question I wanted to kind of ask you, what drives you really crazy when you see people talking about the funeral industry that they're not part of the funeral industry necessarily know what they're talking about? What's something that really drives you crazy you'd like to clear up?
oh gosh. Oh, that's a big one. Well, I went over the PR problem I think embalming has. Embalming is very magical, and I hope you guys will remember that.
I watched 6 Feet Under. I know. Yeah.
I think one of the things that bugs me lately is people who are fans of Caitlin Doty. I love her work, and I love her books, and I think she's a super fun person, and I really love the dialogue that she's opened up about death, and she's really encouraged a lot of new people to walk on the path of death positivity, and I cannot possibly discount that. But she is not an embalmer. She's a funeral director. So sometimes some of the things that she says in her videos are not entirely accurate. So people will parrot them because they're a fan and vehemently argue with me as though I'm wrong. And I try and explain the difference between a 2 or 4 year mortuary degree and a 6 months funeral director license.
Yeah.
No, we're right. We saw it in a YouTube video, and it just bugs the shit out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, I could understand that. Yeah,
tough, though.
that applies to a lot of fields.
Oh, yes. I do think she's doing great stuff, though. I mean, she's definitely marketed herself well, and she's definitely gotten a lot of people interested, and I think that counts for a ton. It really does.
Now, something that I ask all of my guests, and I know that those who knew I was going to be talking to a practicing pagan mortician is probably just dying to get to this part. They may have even fast forwarded through everything to see what you say. Have you ever experienced a haunting?
Fun question.
Sure is.
Remember that near-death experience we were talking about?
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna be that jackass. After I woke up from that coma, I could interact with spirits,
Oh.
and I don't like the word medium because I think it dredges up images of people who want to charge you money and just shill books at you. But I I do possess that set of abilities. So yes, I have experienced hauntings.
Okay. So if you experience spirits, I guess, you want to be that, you said be that asshole. No.
I see dead people, Lonnie.
Yeah. Uh, you're like that guy in 6 Feet Under. It's all of you. No.
I actually, I always tell people I'm not the kid in the one movie.
In the one
I'm
movie.
in that one movie. I'm the lady in Ghost who's just really annoyed by ghosts.
Okay.
It's just like, get out of here. I'm doing stuff.
So when you experience a spirit, how do you actually experience them? Do you see them, hear them, sense them? What's actually happening in your body and your mind?
Um, I have had people ask me that before, and it's very, very hard to describe. I do hear and smell things, which is, I think, a more common type of mediumship. But have you ever been looking out of a window that had a screen in it, and you can sort of you're looking at the world naturally. That's what your eyes want to do. But if you think about it for half a second, all you can see is the screen. Um,
Yeah.
that's how I would say that I see spirits. I can ignore them and just look at the world. But if I think about it for just a little too long, all I can see is the screen. It's always there.
Are people scared of you?
That's a funny question.
Yeah.
What made you ask that?
It just occurred to me that people might be afraid of you.
I did have an experience once where I also am a face and body painter. I've done special effects makeup for years. It's a different podcast episode, though. I think all those stories. But
Yeah.
I was face painting at a children's birthday party, and someone asked me what I did in real life because apparently painting isn't a real job. Write that down. But I said that I was a death worker, and she became very upset and took her child away and was like, "Why wouldn't you tell me that before you touched my child?
Yeah.
How dare you?" And I was so surprised because I had no idea that that was gross or weird. So I guess the answer to that is some people, yes.
Yeah. It's a shame. You should have looked at her. Wait till you find out I'm a witch, lady. No.
If you met me on the street, I seem like the most average, like banana bread baking, book carrying dork. I play D&D and love board games, and I'm super super normal. But as soon as words about dead people come out of my mouth, it's oh no, ew.
Well, if a friend came to you and says, my place is haunted, I got things going kind of wild and wicked, and I know you work with the dead, and I think you see spirits, and I'm pretty sure you're a witch because I found your website.
Okay.
And they need your help. Assuming that you would help them, how would you help someone experiencing haunting?
I have helped people like that. I usually start off being extremely boring, though. Do you have asbestos? Is there a leak? Are you under a power line? Do you have mice? I'm a big advocate of skepticism and ground yourself in reality first. Make sure you don't have other issues here.
Right.
My second tack is: have you tried talking to them yourself? Just have you tried not being a scaredy cat about it and just saying, "Hey, what's up?" or "Get out, you're bugging me"? Because that works a lot. It really does. I would say a good 9 times out of 10 when I go somewhere like that someone has asked me, it's not actually haunted at all. They've psyched themselves out. They live alone. There's something weird about the place that just gives them the creeps. So I'll sense and smudge the place and give them some tips for brightening up the energy in a way that makes them more comfortable and confident in their space. If it is truly haunted, most of the time I just invite that spirit to come home with me. They want someone to see them and interact with them. They want to feel welcome. Um, After so long of not being seen and just making noise, it's often a welcoming option for them. And then I just invite them to be a part of my home until they're comfortable and they can move on to wherever they would like to go.
That's nice. Yeah. You're the first person on the show that I've asked this, um, who says I invite them to come home with me. Every Most people would think, along the lines of, like, make sure they don't follow you home.
I have a very haunted house because I'm always collecting stragglers. They're like stray cats that I keep adopting.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, very good friends of mine, Greg and Dana Newkirk, have the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and Occult, and they've got a home full of haunted and cursed objects that they nurse into like good health.
I have a few objects like that.
Yeah.
I have one. We sort of lovingly call him the ghost in the jar, but he's probably the most malevolent spirit that ever followed me back to the house. And after making a problem of himself, I pinned him into a jar. And he mostly sits on a shelf, and I chat with him now and again, and he's obnoxious, and he'll get over being mean one day, and he can come out of timeout. It's fine.
That's fantastic. You're my favorite mortician.
Thank you very much.
And in your defense, I know another mortician. Well, maybe he's a mortician. He might just be a funeral. It's his family name. He's got to be a mortician too, right?
Probably.
It's his family's funeral home since the beginning of funeral homes in this town.
Not every funeral home owner or funeral director wants to do embalming, so
I can see why they wouldn't.
In my last semester of school, I had there were two older guys who were funeral home owners, and it was their dream to finally get their embalmer's license, and they were both like 60 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Finally gonna make this one legal,
Finally. I mean, certainly if you don't hold that license, they wouldn't be able to, participate or be in the room. So
yeah, that basement's not like Vegas, huh?
It is not like
in the basement stays in the basement.
There are rules. There are very real rules.
Right. All right. One more question I want to ask you that I like to do in the regular portion of the show. Really may or may not have much to do with anything we've talked about. Every place has its own, local history. I kind of talked to you a little bit about how I was tracking down the original burial ground in here. So, every place has got their haunted places, the witches and the legendary people that live there in the past, landmarks that are of significance, and places of power even that are attractive to those of us who practice magic. So anywhere you've lived or visited, but mostly where you've lived, I think is more important. What's one of your favorite pieces of local folklore or history?
That is a very fun question, and I'm glad that you asked it. So, I live in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, a very, very small town, and nearish us, is a town called Lenore. And in Lenore, you'll find something called the Witch's Keyhole, if you look it up online. There's a church called Trinity United Methodist Church, and it's on Seahorn Street in Lenore. Back in the 1800s, they were concerned about witches getting into their home. So what they did was built this huge keyhole into their fireplace as sort of a trap, so that they could brick any errant witches up into their fireplace. And after the house fell down, a church, Trinity Church, preserved it and bricked their sign around it.
No kidding.
It's sort of mysteriously rectangular in such a way that there's a lot of local legend about witches being trapped in there, and like maybe one was bricked up inside it. That's a mystery for you to figure out on your own, I guess.
That's fun. I guess if you're not in it, but it's curious that whoever came up with the concept, a keyhole would be a way to trap witches when, like keys or
heavily associated with Hecate, a goddess
Exactly.
vastly venerated for witchcraft and witches, and Frigg in northern mythology. She's associated with keys, are a big part of her lore association.
Exactly.
Just yeah, keys and keyholes are the last thing on earth I would try to use to stop witches.
I've never, I would not call myself a devotee of Hecate, but a lot of people that I love are. And I confess I have gone there and secretly left offerings for her on their behalf inside the keyhole. So that church might be surprised to know that witches are using it for their benefit.
Fantastic.
I'll give you two for the price of one if you want it.
I'll take it. This is one of my favorite things. That's why I ask.
So Rutherford County began with a town called Forest City, and our county is consistent of Rutherfordton, Forest City, Spindale, and Lake Lure. It's a very big county. But before it was Forest City, it was called Burnt Chimney. They changed the name, I think, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But when the town was founded, some settlers came here, and all that they found was this clearing, and in the center, a burned down cabin. All that remained was the chimney. The town was named after it. And in fact, the chimney still exists in the median of Main Street, Forest City, North Carolina. And I find it very spooky and strange, because if you were in a horror movie and you came across this clearing with a burned down house, the last thing you would do is build a new house there. Sounds like a terrible plan.
Uh-huh.
But that's exactly what they did, and here we are.
Yeah. You're like, look what we found, a clearing, chimney. It's all been burned down. Let's build
Perfect.
something here. But like, I don't think so. Why don't you want to? Because fuck you. That's why. You know?
Was there nobody on the team that went, what happened though? We didn't.
Yeah. What happened here? Yeah. I guess not.
Nope, not at all. But
Well,
no, I love weird little stuff like that. I guess chimneys are the common bond in my favorite weird local things. But
nice. Well, we have come to the end of the regular portion of the show. Is there something that I should have asked, or something you'd like to talk about that I did not cover, or anything that you would like to share as parting thoughts?
sure. I will say, there's a lot of terrible out there now, folks, and don't forget that it's not just your nurses and your doctors out there doing good work. There's also a lot of death workers who are struggling, and they're on the front lines, and they are definitely not being prioritized in the same way those other healthcare workers are. So if you're considering donating any personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, anything you might have laying around, or just want to take them a care package, don't forget your local funeral home, local mortuary school, or your local DMORT team, because they're out there working hard, and they're going into those infected areas, hospitals and homes to collect your loved ones, and they just don't have the gear they need.
All right. That's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. I really hope everyone listening has learned a lot and had some eye-opening moments here concerning the funeral industry, and how those of us who are in the pagan and occult communities should be thinking about this and planning for this and approaching it. Mortellus, tell people where they can find you.
You guys can find me on Instagram and Twitter at A Crow and the Dead, or on Facebook at Facebook.com/Mortellus. That's MORTELLUS. I'm here and there. Write me a message, say hello. I don't bite. I'm always happy to answer any questions somebody might have, and nothing is too strange.
Oh, be careful. You may
I'll
careful.
I'll go ahead and fix it. You have to cook humans to 180. We carry salmonella, okay?
Perfect. And that's a great way to end this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. For everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. You know the drill by now. If you want to hear us get even weirder, Yeah, even weirder than you have to cook a human at 180 degrees. You're going to have to go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. All right, folks, stay weird out there. Mortellus, it is bonus audio time. Are you ready?
I'm ready for the bonus round.
I call bullshit. Nobody's ever ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready as I'll ever get.
All right. First up, what famous person's resting place do you most want to visit?
Ooh.
Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions, magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.